Hello, I'm Chip Stites, and welcome to another episode of The Laughing Retirement. Now, today in finance, we're going to talk about something that has long been debated by many people. But when I read the books, when I look at the results, when I try to make a choice between two things, and I'm talking about growth versus value, I find out that today, for some reason, hype seems to rule the world. And yet, if you read the books, if you read the masters, if you pay attention to what works and what doesn't, one of them works better with a whole lot less risk. Now, first thing I'm going to do is share the screen. And we're going to take a look at value style versus growth style. They have about the same return over the long term, but one of them has that return with a lot less risk. So we're going to try to make sense of the choices that you make when you create a portfolio. Let's take a look. Well, first of all, what do others say about this? Well, the first thing I'm going to look at is Jeremy Siegel's Stocks for the Long Run. Now, he said historically, value stocks, those with lower PEs and higher dividends, have superior returns and lower risk than growth stocks. Fairly cut and dried, fairly straightforward. Now let's take a look at Mark Lichtenfeld. He's the guy who wrote Get Rich with Dividends, which I think is one of the best simple books for creating a dividend portfolio. And it's where I got my 4 steps from, except he does it very differently than I do it, and he looks for other things. He said, according to Ned Clissold of Ned Davis Research, if you'd invested $100 in the S&P at the end of 1929, it would have grown to $4,989 by 2010, based on price appreciation alone. However, if you'd reinvested the dividend, your $100 would have grown to $117,774. So Clissold says that 95.8% of the return came from dividends. Growth stocks don't have dividends. Now, what else is next? John Bogle, Vanguard Funds. Since 1993, the cumulative return of the growth index has been 224% versus 320 for the value index based on traditional calculations of fund performance. Burton McKeel, Random Walk Down Wall Street. The risk of investing in common stocks and bonds depends on the length of time the investment is held. The longer an investor's holding period, the more likely variation, the longer the investor's holding period, the lower the likely variation in the asset's return. That's why over a long period of time, with dividends reinvested, you're more likely to get more money with less risk than you are if you had a growth stock. Now let's take a look at 2 different stocks that are vastly different. One of them is Star Group Utilities, SGU. Now, I've gotten some criticism online for using SGU, but the guy who criticized me had to go all the way back 25 years to around 2000 in order to find a bad year in this stock. Well, I'll take 24, 25 years of good return versus 1 year of bad return any day of the week. So let's take a look at Star Group Utilities. Its price right now is about $11.32. Its 5-year average has been $10.67. That's about a 6% growth rate. Its risk level, or beta, now beta is not directly related to risk. It's really price fluctuation. The price fluctuation is 0.48, which is about half of the S&P 500. The dividend is 6.14%. So I'm making the cost of my taxes plus inflation plus more than 1 to 3%. It's not too bad. The dividend growth rate has been 6.7%. So that's 6.14% grows at a rate of 6.7% over the last 5 years, which is greater than inflation itself. So not only when you reinvest are you getting more shares that increase the dividend, but you're also getting an increased dividend on top of that. That's compounding. That's what Einstein calls the seventh wonder of the world, the eighth wonder of the world. The PE ratio, or the price earnings ratio, is 12.73, when the average utility in the S&P 500 is 21.08. So you're buying the lowest PE with the highest dividend. Isn't that what they told you to do? Isn't that what the masters said you ought to do? Makes sense to me. The payout ratio, now, I want to look at two things here because I want you to understand what I'm saying. One is the price earnings ratio. The price of the stock, $11.32, divided by the earnings per share of stock is 12.73. In other words, when I buy this stock at $11.32 a share, I know it's going to take this company about 12.73 years to earn enough money to justify my price. That may sound like a lot, but if you're buying growth stock, it's nothing. It's very, very low. It's a value stock style. Payout ratio, that's the percentage of earnings that the company is paying out in its dividends. And in this case, it's 74.33%. In other words, Star Group Utility is paying out most of its earnings to the people that hold its stock. That lowers your risk. That to me makes sense. Now let's take a look at another well-known stock. And incidentally, I own both stocks. Google, Alphabet. Its price is $187.21. 5-year average is $127.98. That's an increase of 32% over the last 5 years. It's a pretty good increase. Its beta is 1.3. In other words, it's 2.71 times the fluctuation or the change in Star Group Utilities. The dividend is 0.4127%. In other words, it's a very, very low dividend. The dividend growth rate is 0. It's been the same. The PE ratio is 24.59. And one of the reasons I chose to buy this stock was because it's the lowest PE of the Magnificent Seven. And as we all know, Google recently had an AI, if you will, artificial intelligence breakthrough that they announced. And so I bought the stock right away. The payout ratio is 5.3%. The dividend has not increased. The payout ratio hasn't changed. And the PE ratio is twice that of Star Group Utilities. Now, why on earth would I choose to hold 10 times more SGU than I do Google? First of all, it's a lower beta and lower price. There are fewer periods of loss. There's less fluctuation in the stock. I can count on it, in other words. Second reason is higher dividend. I get more shares in reinvestment. It represents 5+% of my holdings, slightly over 5% of my holdings. It takes no effort to earn a dividend. I don't have to do anything. All I have to do is sit there and watch them come in. This stock will earn enough to pay me for the price I paid in 12.73 years. I'll be 88 years old. Now, Google. Well, Google's got a higher beta. It's got higher price fluctuation, and the price moves more erratically, if you will. And so it has more periods of loss. It has a lower dividend, fewer shares, less value on reinvestment. It represents about 1.5% of my holdings. To protect myself, I much watch the news, the earnings, the forecasts. Nothing is definite. Ups and downs. matter in this stock. In other words, a growth stock is generally dependent upon who buys it next and how much they pay for it. And this stock will earn enough to pay me for the price I justified, the price I paid for it in 24.59 years. So I'll be 105 years old. Well, which is better? Which makes more sense? To me, holding Star Group Utilities, holding the value stock, makes a lot more sense in what's going to happen to me over the next 4 years. People need utilities than owning Google, because I don't know what's going to happen to Google. I have relatively greater assurance of what's going to happen to me, consistency, if you will, with Star Group Utilities. Now, why do I structure my portfolio for less risk, greater dividends, and a lower PE? Well, number one, greater ease of management. I know I'm going to get paid dividends. I don't have to worry that people are going to stop walking into their house and not turning on the gas for heat or not turning on the gas for their stove. I don't have to worry about that. Star Group Utility, number two, pays me for the risk that I take. I don't have to worry about that. It doesn't take any effort at all, number three, to earn a dividend. All I got to do is sit here. 4 simple principles developed around consistency also help me manage my portfolio, because I look at, okay, what's the price fluctuation? What is the dividend I am getting? How much of their earnings are they paying out? And how much is the dividend growing? I look at those 4 things. Relatively simple to manage. You can see it right in front of you. I also know something else. Time is on my side. The longer I hold something that pays me a dividend consistently, the less risk I take. Lower risk, greater consistency, greater return. And that's what every one of these books tell you. And I can show you 5, 6, 7, 10 other books by the masters, one of whom is Warren Buffett, another of whom is his partner, Charlie Munger, that say the same thing. So what about Google? Well, it's more difficult to know what Google will do, what's going to happen to the price. Nobody can predict the future, but for that price to go up, I have to know that the next person's going to buy it. With Star Group Utilities, all I have to do is sit there and reinvest the dividends. With Google, you're not paid for the risk you take. So you're dependent on how many people buy the stock. It takes a great deal more understanding to know what Google's going to do than it does Star Group Utilities or SGU. What were their earnings? Did they come out with something new? How many people are interested in their latest product? What's going to happen to the product? Did a world war change things? Did the economics change things? All of those things factor into how Google will do. Most of them don't factor into how a utility is going to do unless people stop walking into their houses, stop turning on the lights, stop turning on the gas. Higher risk in Google is less consistency. And what I want in my portfolio is consistency. Now, if you're interested in this and this makes sense to you, send me an email at info@thelaughingretirement, INFO at, all one word, The Laughing Retirement. And say, Chip, I'd like to try to understand more. The other thing you can do is watch the videos here. One right after another, I explain what we do and how we do it. Investing doesn't have to be difficult. Investing doesn't have to be something that is hard to understand. We make it simple for you. We allow you to control your financial future. I'm Chip Stites. This is The Laughing Retirement, and I hope you have a great 2025.